Hello everyone, welcome to another Quad Education Test Prep Fundamentals video. My name is Tom, and today we're going to be talking about a math topic that apparently is one of my favorite things to talk about in the world. It's something that I've spoken about, at least in part, in at least 3 other videos. And the reason for that is it's just something you have to be good at to be successful on these tests. It's also one of those skills that if you're not actively practicing it, it's going to get a bit rusty, and it's basically use it or lose it. That topic is factoring, so let's take a look. Okay, factoring again. So previously, we really only have to talk through factoring, which is to say I've talked about factoring as a part of another concept, but today we're going to just hammer home with a quick intro on factoring and then just do a whole bunch of practice. So how do you factor? Well, factor is a lot like a little puzzle, which is one of the reasons that I like it so much. And so we have something like x squared minus 3x minus 18 here, and there are a bunch of clues laid out for you to figure out what two binomials this particular trinomial is composed of. So that's the goal. We're going from this trinomial into two binomials, and for this standard x squared whatever is always going to be x something and then x something that it's going to factor to. The first thing that I always try to figure out is the signs of the two factors. So these can either be positive or negative and positive or negative. And the clue that's going to help me figure out which is which is the signs of the two, either addition or subtraction signs between the letters and the constant in the trinomial. So just generally off to the side here, you can have a positive and a positive, so something like x squared plus 2x plus 1. And what that means is the factors there will be a positive and a positive. You can have you could also have a positive and a negative, which would mean that we have one being a positive and one being a negative. We could have a negative and a positive, which would mean that both are negative. And finally, we could have what we have here, which is a negative and a negative, which means that one is negative and one is positive. And as we can see here, we have two subtraction signs. So we know that one is negative and one is positive. Let's just write down what we know, which is that we have a negative and a positive. And we know this because of the FOIL principle. For our last, that's always going to be the constant. So if we have a negative right there, that means that we have a positive times a negative. Because if this was a positive here, it would either have to be two negatives multiplied together or two positives multiplied together. And so the next thing we do is we want to try to figure out what these numbers, these constants for the factors are. And what we're going to look to for evidence there is the two constants. So we have 18, which is actually the first place we're going to look. Ironically, the last number is the first place we look for figuring this out. And you have the middle number. So from that 18 there, we know what the factors for these two numbers, because these two numbers need to multiply together to give me 18. So that can either be 1 and 18, or 2 and 9, or 3 and 6. And if it's the other way around, then it's effectively the same thing. Now, it could be any of these three. We have no idea until we look to the number in the middle. Because this number is composed of the outer and inner put together, this tells us the sum of these two values. And since this is negative, this is going to tell us that the negative value, if you want to be complicated, is the absolute value. The negative constant is going to be greater than the absolute value of the positive constant. But basically, that's going to say, all right, we need to add 1 and 18 together, 2 and 9 together, 3 and 6 together, in some combination of one being positive and one being negative. And that needs to equal negative 3x. And since 1 and 18 are really far apart, and 2 and 9 are really far apart, that's going to leave us only with 3 and 6, because those are indeed 3 apart. So negative 6 and positive 3, and that's going to be how we factor x squared minus 3x minus 18. And before we dive into practice problems, I'll just go through one more here, and that's x squared minus 8x minus 16. The interesting thing here is this is actually a perfect square. So you say, okay, what are factors of 16, 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4? And since we're saying we have a negative and a positive, that means that they are both going to be negative. We can say, okay, well, -1 plus -16 is too big. -2 plus -8 is also too big, but -4 plus -4 is -8. So that's how we know that we have 4 and 4, which is to say this is 2, but you would just write it obviously as x minus 4 squared. All right, let's clear all this information out. And as promised, do a whole bunch of practice. Okay, as promised, a whole bunch of factoring practice. Take a look. All right, let's run through all of these. Okay, first one here, we know we're going to have a negative and a positive. All right, that's going to be adds to -1 and multiplies to -12. So it's just going to be 4 and 3. So x minus 4 times x plus 3. This one here, we're going to have sort of the same thing, but a little different. We know that our positive value in absolute terms is 3 or 5 greater than our negative value. That's just going to be x plus 8 times x minus 3. Very standard. This next one here, we're going to have, well, what adds to 12 and multiplies to 36? That's just going to be 6 and also 6. So there we're going to have our nice perfect square, x plus 6 squared. And then for this next one here, we're going to have a minus and a minus. So there we're going to say minus and minus. So what adds to 15 multiplies to 36? That's just going to be -12 and 3. This next one here, so this is the sort of the first interesting one that I did because we have this x to the 4th issue. So how are we going to work on that? Well, here we're just doing x squared as our first term, and it's going to operate the same way as just having it be x otherwise. So then we're going to say, all right, well, what adds to -7 multiplies to 12? That's just going to be -3 and -4. And for another sort of tricky one here, actually what we're going to do with this one is pull out a factor of 2x. And this is our first, little 3 solution. So 2x, and then what we're left with inside is x squared minus 2x plus 1. And that's pretty clearly just going to be x minus 1 squared. So 2x times x minus 1 times x minus 1, which if you want to be thorough, I suppose you could just call 2x times x minus 1 squared. For this one here, we went ahead and threw the difference of squares at you, so that factors to x minus 6 and x plus 6. Should be pretty familiar. If you haven't seen our video on difference of squares, definitely go watch that one. And the same thing there for y squared minus 6, except I'm being a little bit more annoying and just seeing where your lazy powers are here, because on this test they like to say, okay, well, you avoid working a little bit. And all we're going to say here is this is going to be y minus the square root of 6 times y plus the square root of 6. And that's a whole bunch of factoring practice. Okay, that's it for this video. So I'll say if you weren't able to do each of those practice problems in 20 seconds or less, then you do need some more practice with factoring. And the great thing is there is an absolutely limitless supply of factoring out there on the web. Or better yet, reach out to us for help. At Quad Education, we are more than happy to help you with all of your academic and tutoring needs. Anyway, if you found this video useful, please consider liking and sharing it and subscribing to Quad Education. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.